All right, Tim, it looks like the numbers have flattened out a bit. I think if you
Alrighty.
want to kick us off.
Thank you, Hillary. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wheeler. I'm the LPA Board Vice President. And I want to thank you all for attending LPA's 2021 Power Supply Town Hall this evening. Board members on the panel, you'll see them here on the screen. Maybe you could raise your hand just to identify each of the board members. And our wonderful staff attendees who will be helping to make the presentation. Thank you. As some of you may know, LPA has been exploring our options regarding future power supply for more than 2 years, with an eye to sourcing affordable, reliable generation and low carbon electricity to power our communities. We held a series of virtual town hall meetings on this very topic around the same time last year, and are now excited to share some recent developments on this front. This evening, Dan Harms, LPA's VP of Grid Solutions, will give a presentation on this topic. We are also pleased to have with us Pat Bridges, the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer from Tri-State, who will be presenting a state perspective. Pat, maybe you could raise your hand so people can see who you are. Thank you. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will open the floor to questions, but you can please feel free to type in your questions at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom interface. We will then answer those questions live during the Q&A permitting. In fact, all the questions will need to be submitted through the Q&A box at the bottom. So if you have them as you go along, feel free to type them in. And to wrap up this evening, when we get to the end, and in National Cooperative Month, which is October, we will select 2 names from the participant list to receive a 50 business. So stay online for your chance to win. And without further ado, I will hand this over to Dan Harms to begin the presentation. Thanks, Dan.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I'll be sharing my screen here shortly. And let me get that, go ahead and get that going, and we'll get this presentation underway.
And
looking good there, Drew?
yep, looks good.
All right. Yeah, once again, thank you everybody for joining us here tonight. We have some, I think, some very exciting information to share with you. We had one of these maybe, gosh, almost a year ago, and always sharing information as it becomes available to us. We know more and more pieces to the puzzle every day, and finding out more information, and we're at another point of a journey where we want to share some more of this information with you. So tonight's presentation will be that update on the future of our power supply, and I think presenting some great headway that has been made here lately. So without further ado, we'll get into this. So our objective tonight is to provide you, our members, a clear understanding of what we're calling a partial contract option and its benefits. You know, as you know, we've been looking at lots of different options. This is going to be the emphasis tonight is going to be on that partial contract option. So for our agenda, we have going to give you some background information. Even if you haven't been participating in our previous discussions, we'll fill you in on our journey up to this point. This is where Pat Bridges from Tri-State will also help out with some of this information as well. We'll talk about the power supplier request for proposals as part of this partial contract option, and what that proposed power supply option would look like and partnership would look like going into the future. Of course, we want to give you the benefits and explain why we think this is a good thing for the membership, and we'll end it with what these savings could really mean for you, and maybe some next steps, and we'll be glad to take everybody's questions there. Let's start off with some background information. As many of you are aware, La Plata Electric adopted a strategic goal in 2018-2019 timeframe, where we strive to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% from 2018 levels by the year 2030, while keeping the cost of electricity lower than 70% of our peers. And what that last part means is that we're doing this without any upward rate pressure is our objective here. So why is there so much focus on cost of power? Well, this pie chart helps tell that story. This is from our financials at the end of the year. And you can see that cost of power is a very large portion of LPA's expenses. So that is something that we definitely want to pay attention to. It's the number one driver of our rates. It's $68 million of our annual budget. And we want to make sure this is something that we look out for on our membership's behalf. So the board adopted a three-pronged strategy. And what that three-pronged strategy involved was prong number one, looking at flexibility within our current contract with Tri-State. There was a contract committee that met, and we reviewed a lot of different options in that. One of the things that came out of that was a 2 megawatt provision to install a community solar garden. So we're looking forward to being able to implement that here in the near future. Also, as part of the discussions ongoing at FERC, what resulted in that was a 4% wholesale rate decrease by the middle of next year. And so that's all coming into account too. So that's covering some of the things that we covered or we did on the first prong there. The second prong is looking at a partial contract. Possibly we can diversify and have part of our power supply come from Tri-State and part from another power provider. Give us a little more flexibility and latitude. That's where we put a lot of focus here lately. A policy was actually established at Tri-State with its members as we came to agreement on what that might look like. And it provided the ability for La Plata Electric to go and look for 50% of its power supply from another resource. We were able and were granted some ability to do that. And what we did, and because after getting that information, was we went and established some RFPs, requests for proposals, looked for different options of what's available out there. And we have selected a vendor to continue negotiations with, and we want to explain some of that to you here tonight. And then the third option of our three-pronged strategy was a full exit. Not saying we're going to do a full exit, but we certainly wanted to know all the information behind what a full exit would look like. What kind of cost might be involved with that? What kind of benefits might be involved with that? And that's why a lot of the negotiations and discussions have been going on at FERC today. And that's where things still are, is looking for that fair contract termination payment is what they call it. But tonight we're going to focus on where we've made the most progress lately, which is that partial supply, that partial power contract. So what a partial contract structure looks like when it was set up in the policy at Tri-State was that a member cooperative could have the ability to go and source half of their power supply, half of their capacity from a power supply other than Tri-State. So in October of 2020, Tri-State approved that partial contract policy so that we could go look for that. Now, this new policy allows Tri-State members to diversify their power supply portfolios, we mentioned earlier, so that we can get part of our power from Tri-State, part from a new power supplier. And so Pat was definitely integral in those discussions that we had ongoing at Tri-State. So I'm going to let him shed some light on this from Tri-State's perspective there. Pat, would you mind covering this slide for us?
Thank you, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, from Tri-State's perspective, we hope this is a win-win for everybody. As you might know, Tri-State is an association of LPEA and 41 other electric cooperatives, some bigger, but most smaller than LPEA is. And as you might also expect, with 42 people of any sort, you're going to have a lot of differences of opinion and objectives and strategies. And we have that obviously in our family of co-ops as well. And LPEA, I would characterize as being more on the leading edge, more progressive, looking to do some things that some of our members do not want to do. And they've also been integral, I think, in pushing Tri-State along that path to become, quite frankly, a greener utility than we have been historically. You may know that we have already closed 2 coal units. We have announced closure dates for 3 more coal units. We are contracting for significant amounts of new renewable generation, both wind and solar. We anticipate that by 2024, which is not too far away anymore, that 50% of the energy we provide to our members will be renewable. For some, that is probably too much. For some, not be enough. So the next step has been, and as Dan mentioned, this process we've been through actually over a couple year period, maybe a 3-year period now, to give certain members, if they choose to, more flexibility under their contract. The Tri-State contract with the 42 members essentially requires Tri-State to provide all the members' power needs. And there are some small carve-outs, but for the most part, essentially all their needs. And most members have, well, it's about half the members have never done anything on their own. They're quite happy with that arrangement. Other members, however, want more flexibility, more local control, and that's where this comes in. This partial requirement contract, the reason we characterize it as a win-win is it provides LPEA and other similar co-ops who want it, the flexibility to do more renewables if they choose, to have more flexibility in determining where their power comes from, still be part of the Tri-State family, however. From a Tri-State perspective, as we move forward in the next few years in the energy markets, and we are closing down that coal generation, and we're required to replace it with something. And there's obviously a potential risk for that. There's a potential cost burden for Tri-State for that. And this type of project we're talking about here somewhat, I won't say it transfers the risk to LPEA, but it shares that more, where LPEA can make decisions on their own. They will then go forth with that. And that small portion, or whatever portion that might be, of what would be Tri-State's obligations has now been shifted. And so Tri-State can go forth with a smaller amount of load to procure in the future. So that's what I think it may be a win-win. And also, I would say it's a win-win from a relationship perspective. As you might be aware, we've had some disagreements over the years. Hopefully this is a step towards a better relationship between Tri-State and some members like LPEA, to give them more flexibility. And I've talked to Dan about this in the past, a partnership just trying to solve your members' needs, as opposed to this is the way the wholesale contract was written in 1952, and we can't change it. So that's where I think this is a good process and a good model for Tri-State and all of our members. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for that update there and catching us up there. All right. So as we move forward here, so our next step is we're going to cover some of the information on our power supplier request for proposals. As we discussed, we applied for, we were awarded, so to speak, the ability to go and shop for some of our own power supply here. So that's what we're going to get into on this section. So we did develop an RFP with a third-party, credentialed third-party consultant to help us with this process. And in that process, we identified that we could go look for a 71 megawatt block of 24/7 round-the-clock power to fulfill this partial contract award allocation that we received from Tri-State. So this started with us sending out several different the RFP to several different vendors, qualified vendors throughout the area that could deliver power to our area, and had the ability to do that in a firm fashion. And we received 9 responses, and then we shortlisted 3 of those and eventually had it whittled down to one that we're working with today. And these proposals were evaluated thoroughly based on the value they could provide. Of course, that was one of the highest things that we had to watch for, is that we made the pledge that we were not going to proceed with doing this if it put any upward rate pressure on our members. So that was number 1. Do we have a viable option, a viable proposal here that could possibly reduce our cost of power? Of course, supply flexibility, as Pat and we have mentioned, is a critical part of this as well. What can we do and possibly have the local projects within our area service territory here to contribute towards that? The environmental attributes were also a strong point that we were looking to evaluate as well. Looking for companies that just weren't going to sell us market power with renewable energy credits laid over the top of it. We're looking for somebody that could supply us with new renewable generation that helped clean the grid. Reliability and strength of both, not only the company, but also of the power supply. Very, very critical elements that took into consideration during our evaluation as well. We could not sacrifice any reliability of the grid that we have today And we want a company that had strong financial backing and could provide us with the resources that we needed. Okay. Now onto the proposed power partnership that we're looking at here. As Pat was talking, this is a win-win for Tri-State and La Plata Electric. And it takes coordination, of course, with that energy delivery between Tri-State and our alternative power provider to make this all work. So the alternative power supplier would be providing 71 megawatts of capacity. It'll be a block of capacity, while Tri-State would provide the remainder. Everything that moves up and down with our loads, Tri-State would be following for us. Then LPA, the great part about this is LPA still maintains those key benefits of having a relationship with Tri-State. We still maintain our capital credits with Tri-State. We are able to maintain our rebates that Tri-State offers us, the support that Tri-State offers us in many aspects as well. So for the grand unveiling of who our new power supplier is going to be here, working with Crossover Energy Partners. And that is the company that was able to meet all of those evaluation criteria that we had in a stellar fashion. So to go into a little more detail on that, we chose Crossover Energy Partners to continue negotiating with because they proved that they were an innovative, could create innovative partnerships and customized solutions for La Plata Electric. And they had the best overall scores as we were going through the metrics here on not just cost and reliability, but also the clean energy. Very strong financial backing. And they have established specialists who have been in the field for many decades that have developed more than 10.5 megawatts of renewable and traditional generation. New renewable generation construction dedicated to LPA. I mentioned that was an important part to it. What we were not looking for was necessarily something that was, like I said, market purchases, just with the environmental attributes tagged onto it. And we were also, they were also willing to seek creative local generation solutions. As part of this partnership, we're looking to create local generation within our service territory, but also be able to take advantage of maybe some larger scale projects that might be adjacent to our service territory as well. And the proposal also included substantial commitment to our community. That was another element that we were looking for. And I'll get into more details on the specifics on that here shortly. So let's cover some of what we're calling our top 5 benefits of this partnership that includes not only Crossover, but also Tri-State as we move forward through this. First off is cost stability. And I can't emphasize this enough, is that we are now looking at having the ability for half of our power supply to have, set pricing for a 20-year term. And so what I mean by that is that we know what that pricing is going to be every year for the next 20 years. And that gives us that price certainty on that part of our power supply there, which gives you price certainty on your bills as well. And it doesn't do any good to have price certainty if they can't stand behind it. So you want to make sure, and this was what we thought was a great aspect of Crossover Energy Partners, is that they had the financial backing to also weather that storm. Next benefit, reliability. As I mentioned, that is a very important aspect. In fact, most of us probably on this call, what we're looking for is the ability to come home, turn on the light switch and have our lights come on. We take that for granted today. We want to be able to continue to be able to do that. And that's, a very, very important aspect of what La Plata Electric provides to you. So we'll have, through this partnership, we will still have continued use of Tri-State's reliable transmission grid. So the same way those electrons are being delivered to us today will be delivered to us tomorrow. We are still a full transmission customer of Tri-State through this partnership. We'll also receive continued service from Tri-State for their substation and transmission line maintenance. They've often helped our crews when we do some transmission work or we have substation work, and they can help us with some switching orders. That partnership still continues. Then we'll have additional transmission accessibility through crossovers partnerships. They'll have access to, so they will have access to not only Tri-State's transmission grid, but possibly some other elements that crossover can bring to the table as well. Then on top of that, the new regional generation facility that can be installed in our area reduces LPA's dependence on the transmission grid. And then say further away generation assets would provide. So this provides the LaPlata Electric increased resiliency and reliability that then our members see. Then to hit on some of the environmental benefits of this new partnership is that this power supply could help, you know how I mentioned that corporate goal at the beginning of the presentation of striving to cut our emissions by 50% by 2030. With this partnership, we could exceed that goal 6 to 7 years early. So that's exciting news, I think, for everybody. And we do so by using 75% of this new power supply being served by new renewable generation that is dedicated to LaPlata Electric. Then on top of that, we have our power that we're receiving from Tri-State. As Pat mentioned, they're retiring coal units. They're bringing on more renewables. They have an energy resource plan that then further reduces that carbon footprint of the power that Tri-State provides to us. The fourth benefit, commitment to community. This is a wonderful picture from our Snowdown parade, Snowdown float a couple of years ago. You guys probably recognize the theme there. So their commitment to community, there's over $1 million in educational grant funds that came along with this proposal as well to help support our community. Not to mention that on top of that, we have local projects that create local jobs. We have Tri-State's continued support for energy rebates. That is a lot of money that still comes into our service territory that'll continue to come in here. LPA also maintains its capital credit balance. As you may have heard from other utilities that have done full buyouts, part of that comes with the forfeiture or the use of the capital credits towards that buyout payment. This option does not involve that. And just in total, it keeps more money in the local economy. Then finally, we're going to hit on the savings here. Now, this is a big part. This is what we were saying. We cannot move forward with this as an option unless there's a positive savings to our membership. We're estimating approximately $7 million in annual savings or potential for our members every year. And that means about $35 million in savings the first 5 years, with a total of $140 million of savings over the full 20-year contract period. Now, there's a lot of things that go into an estimate that can calculate these savings here. And I wanted to name a few just so you know what's included in here. We did use the proposals, the RFPs that we received. That's the base cost of the energy that's underlying in this option that we're working through here. I really want to give everybody on this call all the details on exactly how much the buy down payment is going to be and how much purchase power is going to be, but we cannot do that while we're still doing legal settlement issues. So after the legal settlement issues are concluded, we can share more information with you at that point. But until then, we're trying to give you these savings to try to give you an idea on why we think this is such a good idea here moving forward. I'm also going to show you this annual savings chart here and explain a little bit more on what you're seeing here as well. So I talked about the approximate $7 million a year annual savings. And you might be wondering why after 20 years does that jump up so high there? Well, the reason why is because I did mention there is a buy down payment that goes with this. And once that is, we're looking at financing that over 20 years. Once that's done, then after that 20-year period, that's no longer part of an expense for us. And so we have even more savings after that period there. So that's why that jumps up for a potential of even $15 million a year in savings in the future. Now, this uses Tri-State's long-term financial forecast for the underlying assumptions on how much the power supply of theirs is going to cost. It's using the request for proposals. It is including full transmission delivery to LaPlata Electric for 100% of our needs. We've added inflation in there to cover costs into the future as well, especially those of some of the services that maybe left some room for additional services that might be needed going into the future as well. So those are all the kind of things that are included in those annual savings there. So in conclusion, on some of the high priority items that we've hit today, it does reduce our power supply costs. We're looking at increased cost stability, increased reliability and resiliency, a less carbon intensive future, continued commitment to community, and a continued partnership with Tri-State. So what could these savings mean for you? What these savings could result in are significant cost savings to La Plata Electric. That could result in one or more of the following. We've got a lot of options at our disposal that would include a possible rate decrease, or we could have flat rates well into the future. We could also increase funding for capital projects or fire mitigation to improve reliability. Another option is increased capital credits. So there's all sorts of options that could come of these cost savings here. And then lastly, we'll get into some of the next steps and decision points. First, the board will decide if the partial supply contract is a path to pursue. Now, I do want to be clear here that we have not decided at this point that partial power supply is definitely the option for us. We wanted to come and talk to you as the community. First, get some input, get some feedback, and that's part of that decision-making process as well. And then once we feel like we have all the details to make that decision will be made. But this decision will not exclude and not keep us from also pursuing a full buyout in the future. So it's not one or the other. It could be this as a stepping stone towards the other if that's a path we want to follow. And then once that's decided, the next step would be to finalize the partial contracts with Crossover and Tri-State. And then with this being involved with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, they'll also need to approve this contract methodology. That's one of the underlying elements within this partial contract. And so those would be the next steps. Mr. Wheeler, I think I will turn it back over to you.
Great, Dan. Thanks. That was good. And Pat, also, thank you for your participation. And now I get to hand the floor over to Hillary Knox, LPA's VP of Member Experience, who will quarterback the Q&A session and final door prize drawing. So Hillary, please take it away.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Dan, for that presentation. Just again, to all of our listeners, if you have a question, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom console, you'll see the Q&A section. You can type your answer in there. If for some reason you do not have access based on your device to that Q&A, you can also email your questions into comments@lpa.coop, and I will go ahead and read those live on here today. So I will just go ahead and get us kicked off. We already have about 6 questions in the queue. The first one up is from Cheryl Ayers. Is the $1 million educational grant funds a one and done deal or just the beginning of community involvement?
I'll take that. The way it was proposed was $200,000 a year over 5 years. But there's also other involvement that I know their partners have done in the past with other utilities that we look forward to enjoying here at La Plata Electric as well.
We have a question from Gwen Unger. Does it make sense to finance the buyout over 20 years, or would it be better to do it quicker? I'm not sure if Carl wants to take that one.
Sure. Could you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. We haven't finalized how we are going to do that at the moment. The preliminary discussions I've had with a potential funding partner, they would prefer 20 years, and that would be more beneficial in terms of an interest rate. But we will keep our options open and make sure we get, when the time comes to finance it, that we get the best deal for the membership.
Right, and then there are several questions that I'm going to just go ahead and combine because they're both quite similar, and they have to do with Crossover's energy mix. There's some questions about exactly how they're going to be supplying that 71 megawatts to us, and where they're going to be getting that power, if it's coming from solar farms, where are those located? So is there any details we can share on that at this point?
Yeah, and in their proposal, they certainly had some specific locations that they wanted to develop solar, and as well as solar within LPA service territory. Once we have all the PPAs ironed out, we'll be able to share more of that information with you. But at this point, some of that stuff's still up in the air, looking for the best value for our membership going forward, and also something that gives La Plata Electric good diversity. We need to have a mix of solar, wind, and energy storage. Because as I mentioned, we have a 71 megawatt block of power to fill. And so we can't just have something that is partially available. We need something that's available 24/7. So it takes a layer of different assets to make all that happen, and different resources.
So
I
this
hope that
leads
answers most
nicely.
of those questions.
Sorry, Dan. This leads nicely into the next question, which I know is still something that we are working on. Scott Crater would like to know the projected timeline for the board decisions. So you had that last slide where you talked about next steps, but what are we looking at? What can we commit to regarding a generic timeline at this point?
Sure. Yeah. Was there somebody else who wanted to cover that, or? Okay. So lots of, just sort of mention some of the steps that are out there. Saying negotiate a purchase power agreement was a pretty short sentence, but a very, very long process. That'll take, anticipate several months. And we are hoping that we would be in the position to take power supply, a new power supply offering in somewhere between January 2023 and January 2024.
Great. All right, so the next one, I have to read off my phone because I got kicked out. And it was one of the earliest one asked. But this one is from Tim Miller. As LPA's load grows above 142 megawatts, will the partial option apply to the incremental load too?
That's a great question, Tim. Right now, what we have received as part of the process of this policy that was developed is a fixed 71 megawatt block. So initially that is 50%, but as load grows, that will be less, possibly less than 50%. Tri-State anticipates having additional open seasons in the future. We could apply for future open seasons for that incremental 50% of that incremental amount in the future. If I said something wrong there, Pat, correct me too.
You're correct.
All right.
All right. This question is from Kyle Amstadter. I'm sorry, I really mispronounced your name. With increased energy use from EVs, heat pumps, et cetera, will the 71 megawatt portion of Tri-State's portion increase to remain at 50% or remain fixed with the growth coming from crossover? Very exciting news either way. Great work. I think you kind of just answered that, Dan. But
yeah, that dovetails right in with that one. It works the other way as well. If we have increased efficiencies, but we have electric vehicles coming on, and so loads could go up, loads could come down. Our portion from crossover will remain at 71 megawatts.
Okay, here's one from Barry Lausman. A partial purchase of outside power will require a partial buyout of the contract, but that amount is still unknown. And I assume you'll have to pay wheeling costs to Tri-State for that external 71 megawatts. Naturally, this will add costs to LPA. We are hearing the upside, but not the downside. So maybe, Dan, you can talk again about what costs were included in that financial calculation slide we showed.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you refer to wheeling costs, since we're still 100% Tri-State transmission service customer, that is really the wheeling. And so we still have that there. Now, the new power supplier crossover will be responsible for getting the power to a zone that La Plata Electric can take it from. And so that is part of their arrangement. They pay for it to get it to the point where we can take it and utilize Tri-State's network to get it to our service territory. And so that's the point there. reading a part of that question. What was the other part of that question there, Hillary? It seemed like there was something else there.
Let's see. See, it's at the bottom of the answered list.
Oh, I know. We didn't know what the buy down payment was at this point. That is something that's why we're giving this presentation today. We really feel like we're honing in on that. We have a MOU in place with Tri-State today that anchors a methodology in place. That's not going to be absolutely complete until the full agreement is signed, but we have come to terms and gotten to the point where we have agreed with that. The board has approved that from an MOU. It still has to get approved by FERC, but we do have good numbers on that. I can't share those with you today because FERC has not yet approved it. Once FERC approves it, I think we can share that, but we feeling very solid on those numbers.
Another question here from John Angst. If our need is 142 megawatts and we secure 50% of 71 megawatts from Tri-State and %% from crossover 71 megawatts, what would our total renewable use be? That just took me back to a math equation in high school, having PTSD.
Right. So we have run those kind of numbers, saying, okay, we've got this from Tri-State, this from crossover. How does that overall mix look? Particularly from a carbon emissions perspective, since that's what our goal is oriented and shaped around. That's what we were looking at. We feel that we'll be just above a 50% reduction there. And so as far as a total renewable percentage, that number I have not calculated yet, but Tri-State's is growing as time goes on. Pat, currently, can you tell us where you're sitting right now as far as percent carbon free?
Currently, I think Tri-State is around 35% renewable to our members. As I said earlier, we anticipate by 2024 being 50% renewable. And of course, that will grow beyond there.
Right. And so we have that. And then with at least 75 to 80% of our new power supply being renewable, we could probably work out that math here, but I don't dare do it on the fly right now.
So Dan, we have a couple questions about crossover. So the first one is, who are the partners that make up Crossover Energy Partners? And what percentage of ownership does each one of these partners own or control? Do you want to take that one, Graham?
Yeah, I'll take that, Hillary. Thanks. That's a good question. And I would like to take that sort of under advisement and double check with our current negotiating governing document with Crossover to find out what we can and can't disclose about that. And if I'm able to disclose something, make sure that we post it to our website and have that listed there. But at this point, just because of the nature of the partial non-disclosure agreements that cover our initial negotiations, I'd like to look at that first.
And in case it wasn't clear to you guys, Graham is our attorney. We should probably have our titles on our names, but just why he was answering that question. Also, I'll just echo what Graham said. What we're doing is when you guys type in questions, they all go into a back-end spreadsheet. We're going to be working over the course of this week to make sure that we have written answers to your questions as well, and that those get posted on our power supply page on our website. So when we send you the wrap-up email from these sessions, there will be a link to that in there. So thank you for your patience while we get these things answered. Let's see, Britt Bassett, Crossover has 5 offices in the US. Which of these offices is LPA working with?
Oh, and in today's world of Zoom, we sort of work with all of them, Britt. They've definitely come up and visited us. I believe they have an office in Scottsdale is one of the ones. I'd have to double check on where some of those are coming from, but and Boulder as well. So they've come and visited us already.
Right, here's a question from Alan Best. To be clear, no decisions have been made except the choice of Crossover for further negotiations, ? This is the pathway you have identified, but no commitments have been made, correct?
That is correct. I didn't know if Jessica wanted to speak any more to that or not. No? Okay. So,
No, I think that's it. We'll have more information to the board later this year. But yeah, no final decision's been made.
Here's a question from Betsy Nord. Could you talk more about local generation options?
absolutely. Well, one of the reasons why we all live here in Durango is because we have a lot of sunshine and not a lot of wind. So what tends to make a lot of sense around here is solar. And so it's highly likely that a solar project would be in the mix for a possible local project here. One of the energy partners that Crossover is considering would be somebody that could help us with some things along those lines as well. And there's also lots of other opportunities in our area as well. Everything from biomass to methane capture to possible green hydrogen projects. So there are a lot out there, and we have some time to figure out exactly which ones we want to try to line up in this portfolio to build the most cost-effective and reliable power supply for our membership.
So along that lines of reliability, Dan, there's a couple questions in here that have to do with the extent to which our future power portfolio will be renewables based and what that means for the reliability of our power. So Al Curry said solar and winds are nice, but where does the storage component come from when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing? And we have another from Tammy Jocelyn, who says in a quick Google search, it looks like Crossover does only renewable energy. If we end up with something like 75% renewables with no coal or natural gas, how can anyone expect to have the same level of reliability?
Okay. Crossover Energy Partners is not strictly renewables. They've done a lot of renewables in the past. There will be some forms of traditional generation in our portfolio mix as well. And so, I talked about the importance of having diversification in there. A lot of times you'll get good wind energy in the evenings, we'll get good solar energy during the days. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of dispatchable generation that's included in the mix as well. There's also what we can do is market purchases, where if there is a day where the sun is shining less or the wind isn't blowing as much as anticipated, that's when the market purchases can fill in some of that. But they're putting it together a diversified enough portfolio that should be kept to a minimum. It's a fill in a little bit along the top, but the majority bulk of it would be renewables.
All right, Dan, so we have a number of questions from Grizzly Adams, is the name on here. And he's interested in knowing where the solar farm will be. I believe that we're too early in the process to know any of that, but can you let us know kind of where we are with that?
Yeah, I think we are a little early in the process for knowing exactly where that's going to be. We would certainly want to have negotiations and everything in place and firmed up, property acquisition, that kind of thing before we start disclosing a lot of that to the public. So we're a little on the early side on some of those, but as soon as we can disclose that kind of information, we'll be doing so.
All right. Lawrence Zalberis, why would we want to move to more dependency on solar when the components for solar panels are almost exclusively imported from China?
The renewables are going to be that pathway to the future that keep our large carbon intensity lower, and a lot of parts do come from China today, including a lot of stuff that we buy. But if there's somebody else that has a better answer to that, then feel free to chime in as well.
Okay, there are a number of questions also, Dan, on storage, or if anyone else wants to chime in. Gwen Unger asks, is there any local or remote storage included with the Crossover proposal?
There is. There's a fair segment to that as well.
And if so,
Still
how
working
much?
on
He's asking, sorry.
exactly how much. I really don't want to get into the huge details on that. I'd have to look that up. I think when we get some stuff online, Hillary, we can be more specific on that. Right now, I can say we want to optimize that to be the most cost-effective solution as possible. That's going to be part of what fills in those voids when the resources aren't available at the time. So that's definitely a component of it, and it is explicitly written in the crossover proposal as well to include that.
Here is another question from Paul Ramir. With all the talk of renewables being solar and wind, has there been any consideration to nuclear?
No, I have not considered nuclear in our service territory at this point. Now, if that was, something that popped up as an optimal resource, that would, be something to be discussed.
All right, another question here from John Angst. Why do you think a price lock is a good idea? I don't know.
Yeah, if we can get pricing, and that is a great question. One thing that we could do would be to say, okay, let's not lock in on our price. Let's have something be completely flexible, all the flexibility we want, and we go and purchase it from the markets. As many of you saw what happened in Texas in February, they really wish they had some prices locked in place, limiting that exposure there. Same thing can happen in California. There's a pretty uncertain future ahead of us. Things move around a lot. And so that's one of the things that we have to balance is price certainty with the ability to stay flexible and not have that exposure there. But we feel that as long as we can get something that identifies clear and solid savings, that is a good path to go forward on.
So that leads us into another question we have here from Michael Berghoff. If there is a disaster like in Dallas last year, how do you avoid finger pointing between Tri-State and the other power provider?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll each have our own respective contracts. And so the other power provider, and maybe I wasn't clear enough on this during the presentation, but it's a good point to make, which is with the contract that they'll be providing us, it has that fixed pricing associated with it. No, I'll say known pricing. So we know each year what our price will be, and they take that risk. And so that we don't have to. That is worked into their pricing. So if something like that does happen, like what happened in Texas here, I want to make sure that I've partnered with somebody that has the financial backing to weather that storm. That's also one of the reasons why we picked crossover as well. So that's really why we feel that fixed pricing is a solid model going forward with. And and I'll also qualify, this is once again one of the things that we're looking at. We're piecing together this proposal. Ultimately, this decision still has not been made. And so that's what we'll be looking at to the board to make that decision here in the future.
Okay. Dan, another question from Grizzly Adams. Have you identified where crossover will tap into the power grid?
Yep, that is one of the things that we've been working through as we've first off even sent out the RFPs. We wanted people to deliver the power to us as close to our service territory as possible. And so we named some delivery points which were acceptable delivery points for them to hit. And so those are the ones they were focusing on there. Those are going to be the ones that are closest to our service territory, such as in the Hesperus area. And that's what we've requested them to do, and that's what they've fulfilled.
So along those lines, question on why 20 years? And 20 years is a long time considering the rate of technology advances. Is there any flexibility in this time period?
Yeah, it brings up another interesting point. So one of the things that keeps the cost down low for us is the ownership of these assets, some of the solar, some of the wind. Obviously, if some things are being installed on our behalf and dedicated to LPA, the longer we can use those resources, it's a fixed upfront cost. The longer we can use those, the lower that brings that cost per kilowatt hour down. Same thing happens as Tri-State puts in generation for us as well, looking to leverage those assets over a longer period of time. We didn't feel that 20 years was hugely egregious by any means. It's definitely using that asset well into its useful life. That's what keeps that cost down low. What was the other part of that question, Hillary?
Just, I think, why 20 years?
Why the 20 years?
Yeah.
And Carl, feel free to jump in here as well too, but we did look at a variety of different options. We looked at 10, 15, 20, even 30-year contracts and what the pricing associated with each one of those were in the RFP. So we looked at several options there, and 20 seemed to be that sweet spot that worked well for us.
I would agree with that, Dan. Nothing to add. It just made the most sense, was the best deal.
Dan, with the increase of temperatures in the future, are we projecting more power use as a result?
If temperatures go up, it does create higher usage, that's for sure. Durango has traditionally been a town that the air conditioning consisted of opening your windows and letting the breeze blow across to cool the house off. But we're starting to see more and more people install air conditioning with new construction. So we have seen load increases due to air conditioning load that's been coming on in the recent years.
A couple more questions from Grizzly Adams. Dan, how many acres of panels does it take to supply 71 megawatts? And will there be an environmental review of the location?
Okay. 71. So once again, I'd have to do some calculating there again, but I tell you what, Hillary, let's get back to that one on the written out Q&A when we post that kind of stuff to the website there. And we can give a generic kind of for every 10 megawatts takes X number of acres kind of things, and people can extrapolate that. Because I don't want to say that there's necessarily going to be 71 megawatts of solar. It could be, X megawatts of solar, X megawatts of wind, X megawatts of energy storage that all come together. In fact, the totals could even exceed 71 megawatts because not all of them would be delivering simultaneously to us.
Another one from Ellen Best. Does the likely formation of a regional transmission organization in Colorado and beyond have any bearing on this possible pathway of La Plata?
Wow, very good technical question there. So what she's referring to is a regional transmission organization, that RTO, would allow more effective and efficient use of the transmission grid in not just Colorado, but a lot of the Western states. Texas is its own little miniature grid down in the state of Texas. And then it's the Western interconnected grid that honestly includes everything from California up through Washington, Wyoming, and everybody. So an RTO allows the exchange of generation a little more freely across transmission paths. So an RTO could open up some possibilities for La Plata Electric in the future.
All right, and Lisa Ray has a question. Does this proposal entail infrastructure additions?
It would include infrastructure additions in the form of generation, whether or not there's no planned infrastructure additions of transmission at this point, because those resources can be located. There'll be some transmission to interconnect it to existing transmission, but I would not say any major transmission additions will be. That's where things get very costly. So to make things most cost effective, you want to keep your interconnecting costs down low. There's other transmission projects going on all over the grid that help enable the connection of renewables.
Another question on crossover from Tim Miller. Are you confident that, well, I guess it's not, it's about Tri-State. Are you confident that Tri-State will continue to offer affordable, predictable transmission rates for all of our load and also beyond the 20-year initial term of the new supplier's contract?
That sounds like a good question for Pat.
The question was, are you confident, Dan? Yes, I'm confident that that is one of the things that we do. Obviously, if the transmission system, because our challenge is that we serve a very spread out area, with a relatively small load over that large footprint, which obviously makes our per unit cost higher than it might be compared to a more densely populated entity. But as we move forward in time, there's some questions earlier about the RTO. I think as we move forward with the RTO in this part of the country, that should have significant cost savings to Tri-State as we're able to not just jointly plan, but avoid what they call multiple wheels. Right now, you might have to pay 2 or 3 different companies to move power from point A to point B. Under RTO, it's one standard rate, regardless of where the power might come from, where it might go to. I think that would be one of the biggest things we could do to mitigate any transmission cost increases in the future.
Hey, Hillary, this is Tim. Tim Miller, also the other Tim on here.
Yes.
Had another question, or maybe we could be sure to answer that now.
I
please.
was going to keep Pat on the hot seat while
Thank
he
you.
was talking. So Pat, the other question is, perhaps Tri-State could comment how relatively well or poorly positioned LPA's service territory is regarding access to your new planned tranches of renewable generation.
Well, several of our projects that are under development right now are in the southwest corner of Colorado, so in close proximity to LPEA service territory.
All right, next from Alex Widow, when does LPA plan to reach 100% renewable energy with this potential partial contract? Reaching the 2030 goal early is great, but what's the long-term plan? How does this move get us there?
Yeah, good question, Alex. And I might even put a board of director on a hot spot here to address some of those, because we currently do have that 2030 goal, as you mentioned. We're going to be hitting it early, and there could be future goals that come out of this too. That's one thing is that goals are never static. You want to keep those moving, keep them active. And we haven't hit that discussion. We're sort of taking one step at a time. We'll make this a reality first, and then probably evaluate other possibilities in the future. I don't know if anybody else cares to add to that or not.
I
Hey,
think
Dan,
that's
this
accurate.
is Ted. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Ted.
I just think it's amazing that we're in a position where we're able to start entertaining that question. Not that long ago, we, or at least not we, because I wasn't on the board at the time, but the board was striving to achieve this goal of 50% renewables, and it's really something that we can celebrate at this point. And it sets us up in a position where we really can look for that next goal. So thanks for that great question.
All right, there's a lot of questions. I apologize if I haven't gotten to yours yet, but the list is really long. We'll try and get through all of these. Another question from Alex, Dan, has LPA explored purchasing carbon offsets to reduce carbon emissions today?
Yeah, that's certainly something that's on the option. We do buy some RECs to supplement our green power programs. We haven't focused on that being an effort to meet our carbon goals. We might possibly have to do that in the near term. As you know, it takes time to build renewable generation, and some of these may not come online until 2024. So there might be some layer of renewable offsets that go in there for that. Hillary, I saw Alex also had another question on the math there that I would like to elaborate on too, if you don't mind.
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, so Alex, other question, which was a good one too. 35% renewables from Tri-State plus 75% from crossover. Basically, you do the math, that comes out to be 55%. So therefore, you're not reaching your 50% goal. And so, yes, if you take things on the face with the capacity aspects, the 71 megawatts and 71 megawatts, that's true. But what you have to remember is that renewable percentages are actually based on more of a megawatt hour kind of calculation. It's the energy underneath there. And if you think about the 71 megawatt block of power, that's more kilowatt hours than the 71 megawatt block, or remaining 71 megawatts that Tri-State's providing there. So there's the energy component in there that makes the math come out a little differently than what you necessarily calculated right there.
All right, there's a question from Barry Lausman. Is the proposed contract with Crossover firm guaranteed power at a firm price? You mentioned the possibility of buying power on the open market, but that's what led to huge spot pricing around the country last winter.
Yeah, so when I mentioned buying power on the spot market, that's not La Plata Electric buying power on the spot market. We have a firm price guaranteed power from Crossover for the 71 megawatts. They would possibly be looking at purchasing market power from the market, but that's their responsibility. You know, if it ends up being a tremendous amount, La Plata Electric would be isolated from that. That is their risk to handle and mitigate that part of it.
Okay, Dan, question about our net metering program related from Betsy Nord. It is my understanding that a current solar install on a home can only provide a certain percentage of the power use. Will this new contract change that?
Well, the current, what's there now allows you to provide over 100% of the power at your house. So to install in a home can only provide a certain percentage of power. Yeah, but the percentages, I guess, is over 100%. So this new contract could provide some opportunities there for people that wanted to provide well over 100% as more of a direct purchase power agreement as an element, as a, you know, just like we would have a solar garden in our service territory, that can be smaller scale as well and allow a homeowner to possibly put on more. Then it wouldn't be net metered necessarily anymore. It would be a purchase power agreement from La Plata Electric. Could be an option on there as well. But there's what I do want to make sure everybody does understand is that net metering today, tomorrow, does not have constraint on it from any of the contracts, except for when it gets well over 100, like 150% is our limit today.
Okay, Dan, another question here from Sarah Kelly. Will Crossover be free to pursue rooftop or parking lot awning solar projects with private entities, which could provide grid efficiency benefits, or would they be looking only for larger solar farm types of projects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything can be on the table, Sarah. Now, of course, with larger project comes usually economies of scale, and so those does keep the cost down low. But if there's some, really good opportunity from a carport or something along those lines, that we'd be glad to investigate that as well.
All right, and then along those lines of what types of projects are in Crossover's portfolio, Grizzly Adams has a few. Will Crossover have an open land procurement process that takes in public comment? Please explain the public process of how the location for their will be chosen.
Yeah, so the county does have their criteria for going through the permitting process, and it's very specific for various sizes of solar. And so if anything is installed in La Plata County, all the environmental requirements will have to be conducted, all of the land permitting and acquisition and permitting with the county will have to be done as well.
Dan, it's probably important to note that those type of installations through Crossover is them fulfilling that, not us. And we're not building our own facilities. We're utilizing our partners like Tri-State or Crossover.
Hillary,
I had to forget to unmute myself once, or it wouldn't have been a Zoom meeting. I have another question from Liz McIntyre. Will the delivery of power be at the OATTS rate of about $5 per kilowatt or the member rate at $9 per kilowatt?
Yeah, so under the policy that governs the partial contract, LPA will continue to pay the same price it's paying for its transmission today under the Tri-State member rate.
All right, so we're down to 3 more questions. You have 3 more in you, Dan? Oops,
Think
sorry,
so.
Alan.
Right.
Alan just snuck
We'll
another
have to
one
cut
in
it off
there.
at some point.
We got 4. I think we're just going to take this 4 that are here now. We kind of have a hard stop tonight at around 7:15, but I would again encourage you all, if you didn't get your question answered, or if you remember something after this, comments at lpa.coop. Any questions we get, we'll add to the master Q&A document that we're working on. So Dan, here's one from David Alford. So in 20 years, will you need to seek another renewable source and the original solar farm will be reclaimed? Will LPA own any part of the solar farm? Why did the benefits go up at 20 years if the project ends then?
Right, okay. Yeah, let me cover the part of why the benefits go up if the project ends then, is because that is also the same term at which we were paying off what they're calling the buy down payment. And so after that obligation has been paid to Tri-State, it's paid to Tri-State. Once that financing is complete over the 20 years, then that is no longer an expense that we have to counteract. And so that's why those savings go up. So in 20 years, need the resource, will the original solar farm. So once again, we are not going to be the owner of the solar facility. So that will be Crossover Energy Partners that has that. And so they would likely, I mean, a solar farm lasts well past 20 years. And so if LPA was not the off taker of that, they would be selling that into the market or finding another viable off taker for that power. But just like anytime we have left a substation, we certainly reclaim those. And so that's a likely process that would occur here as well.
Great. Let's see, is there any, this is from Paul Ramiri, is there any consideration of the threat of an EMF attack? Should some foreign country launch one to our transmission capability? Not sure if that's something Pat would like to answer.
No, I'll take it.
It's not.
I figured you wouldn't want that one. Yeah, the EMF tax, same with Y2K, when that was something, of course, now 21 years ago. EMFs were a possibility then as well. So that is one of the reliability and resiliency aspects that we're constantly looking at. It's not just that we're looking at specifically, but that and wildfires and high wind events and all sorts of other things. You know, how do we bring our grid back up to an operational standpoint if everything goes dark? So those are something that our planning group and operations group are constantly analyzing and trying to account for.
Okay, so this one is for Pat. Question from Alan Best, Pat. How many partial requirement contracts among Tri-State's 43 cooperative members are there? And are any of them approaching the 50% being discussed here? And does the Tri-State board have to approve this? And if so, what might that timeline look like? Alan just snuck in like 6 questions.
There are 3 of Tri-State members, 2 others in addition with LPEA, who participated in this initial open season and want to be a partial requirement customer of Tri-State. All 3 of those would be subject to the same agreement we have on how we would calculate that buy down payment. Although La Plata is the only one who's currently signed the MOU. The other 2 are in process. The Tri-State board has already approved the process that we went through. And so these 3 members are, you could say, it'd be pre-approved. There's no further Tri-State board action has to take place. The action that does have to take place, though, as Dan talked about earlier, is continue this process of the settlement agreement, that how do we calculate this buy down payment and get that process through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That's really the approval process that is before us today.
And with that, we're going to go ahead and end the session today, just out of respect for everyone's time. But I really want to thank everyone for your great questions. Again, we will be getting these all in writing as well for reference, because I think there's some really great ones in here. To wrap up today, I get the fun part of picking 2 people to win door prizes. They're 2 $50 gift certificates to local businesses to support them. And again, this is in celebration of Co-op Month, which is this month. So I'm just going to scroll through the names of the folks who have lasted this long. And if your name is called, I'll be reaching out to you tomorrow via the email and phone address that you registered with to talk about how to get you your prize. So the first one is going to go to Kathy Hogan. Congratulations, Kathy. And the last one, we'll go to the last name on the list is Tim Gallagher. So congratulations, Tim and Kathy, and I'll be in touch tomorrow with details on how to get this to you. And I'll hand it back to you, Tim.
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute there. Thanks very much, Hillary. Thank you all to the staff and all the members. Great questions, lots of great comments. And like Hillary has said, if you have any future comments or questions or thoughts on this, please email comments@lpea.coop, C-O-O-P. And as a registrant of this event, you will also receive an email with links to the meeting recording and this slide deck. Even if you didn't attend, then you can tell your friends, share it with them. And thank you again, and have a great evening, everyone.